Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. My guest today is TanyaMarck Oviedo. TanyaMarck is a non-binary, queer, native indigenous person of color who resides on Tongva Kizh Chumash land, colonially known as Long Beach, California. They are currently of service to their communities as a mentor and wellness facilitator. They are the creator of Vamanos, a healing arts practice rooted in and with well-being and being of service. They build community, explore and embody wellness via breath work, energy, mindful movement, mentoring, and space holding. Today we discuss how TanyaMarck first learned about the power of connecting to the breath from their baseball coach as a child. Now they are trained in breathwork practices to support others in releasing stuck energy and activating new insights. We share stories about discovering magic and spirituality through candles at church and connecting to the elements of nature in wind and fog. TanyaMarck also shares about learning to be of service in family and community. We talk about being of service as a spiritual practice that can lead to learning and healing. Find them on Instagram at TanyaMarck. That's TanyaMarck. Hi, TanyaMarck. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Nick. Thanks.
I'm really excited to have you here because you have just started collaborating with me on our monthly meditation groups, and we have more juicy things for people coming up in the future.
Indeed.
So I'm excited for people to get to know you better.
Aw, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for the invite.
So I wonder if you could start just by sharing a little bit with how you first got into the healing and wellness and mentorship work that you're doing now.
Yeah. So I was thinking wow, I had a feeling that question was going to come my way. And I just want to acknowledge something that I have not ever acknowledged before, that I have been an intuitive witch person out of the gate, meaning out of my mom's womb. And it's been, at age 52, it feels really lovely to say that this is something that has been embedded into my being.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that that path was the path I always followed, but certainly these energies have been with me and continue to be with me. This just happens to be a part of my life, a chapter where I get to actually embody more of that and share it with the community. So I got to take it back to my Little League coach, because he was the very first person, Coach Eddie, that taught me how to connect to my breath. No joke. I was a 8-year-old, then identified as female. I now identify as non-binary. And he, baseball tryout, I was the only girl kind of thing. And it was, not a very different time and place. And he could tell that I loved ball, that I loved baseball. And he, I got recruited onto his team. And he could also tell that I was being given a lot of shit about being the only female there. And he was the very first person, Nick, that taught me at practice. He said, just connect to your breath in his own way. I don't remember the exact wordings, but he said, picture yourself doing what you love. Picture yourself, hitting the ball, playing second base. And I honestly feel that was my first introduction to connecting to my breath and some form of visualization. Because then what I ended up doing was my Sony cassette player. I would listen to some pumped up songs before a game, and I would picture, be on my breath. And I remember, being my first game and being in my Little League uniform. And at the time, unfortunately, a lot of not so kind wording, because I was a female and, being made fun of. And I remember hearing my coach's breath saying, connect to my breath, And so, that was my first introduction. So I think as an athlete, growing up as an athlete, connecting to my breath was something that was always a part of that. What brought me here to this breath work was, I was a teacher of high school computer science for 20 years, and I loved sharing wellness in my classroom. So we did do a lot of breathing things. I grounded them and did all of those things because it was part of my regime. And I felt that it was really important to share. Upon leaving teaching, one of my mentors, I was, I'm leaving teaching. It was a 10-year process to unravel from leaving teaching. And she said, well, maybe there's a different way that you can help, and maybe think about the things that have been helpful throughout your own personal spiritual practice. And breath just seems so natural, Nick. Like, honestly, I was like, oh yeah, like it's part of my meditation. So I think there was a curiosity of like, wow, this is something I've not ever really like delved into, but it also feels very natural to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had been attending virtual breath circles, and I somehow found out about John Paul Creamy. And that was the first breathwork certification that I received, and went through that process. And honestly, it just felt like, oh, wow, I'm just kind of now expanding and learning about something that has really been a part of my system. And I'm learning about it and also considering how I can share it with others. So that kind of started that journey. And it just kind of naturally has just come about that, like, wow, as a former educator who held space and facilitated, perhaps this is a tool that, because I feel so passionately about it and it really is embedded into my daily living, that perhaps this would be something I could share. So that's kind of the story of where it came from. Breath has always been somehow, some way part of my journey, as well as when I'm not connected to my breath being a, more darker part of my journey and path. So I find that it's one of the most potent tools we have access to all the time.
Yeah.
So I really love being able to share that with people. I think it's a really potent tool, that we contain here in our systems. So, yeah.
I want to rewind a little bit and go back to your baseball story, because that's really cool connection that you have there. And, I have this image of what like little TanyaMarck was doing on the baseball field and connecting with their breath and that kind of thing. But I was wondering if you had like any particular visualizations or anything that you did imagining your breath or the energy, like maybe moving through your body. I couldn't see it, like imagining your breath coming in and then out your arms into the bat and then hitting the ball across the field or something like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It was attached to music for me. So I had a ritual, and there was a set of songs that I would listen to. And that it would just be like, I'd be laying in my bed, maybe with my Sony Walkman. And then I would have this visualization of me just like doing all the things, as my coach said. So I'd see myself playing in second base and like, making that epic like tag. I'd see myself like hitting the ball, and like going to the bases. And then when I would go up to bat, that's what the thing was so interesting to me, because I think I could just hear his wording. So maybe it was more of like, oh, I'm connecting to my breath. So I always felt very grounded when I was out on the field, because I'd be like, oh yeah, I've seen myself doing this. And I love the sport so much that I think it just really helped ground me to be present. Right. So I don't remember thinking like, oh, this is what my breath is doing. I just remember being so present in all of my sports. This was my awareness last night. A lot of my coaches, I was very lucky, my volleyball coach too, they all were about somehow connecting to breath and visualization. They attached that. So I think along the way, right, I just learned how to connect to my breath as a form of grounding and being present. Right. Which just, I think, allowed me to enjoy that sport so much. Yeah, I was nervous as hell, and, all the stuff that was coming my way, being made fun of. But today I look at that and say, yeah, well, I was a really badass ball player, and it was super intimidating because, I came in and I was good at what I did and I enjoyed it, and so, yeah, the mockery and all that crap was a way to distract. And my coaches used to tell me that too. Like, that's just, they're intimidated by your ability. So connect and see yourself being a badass at what you do, So yeah, so music was also very attached. That was my pregame ritual. I'm a pre-facilitator ritual too. Like those are still things that I do to this day, even prepping for this podcast. I was out stretching, connecting, grounding to my breath, having a lovely conversation, So I think that those are tools that are just so valuable, right? Just the simple connecting to the breath. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about that before we recorded, about how you were really into these different ways that you prepare for ritual through ritual. You have your ritual preparation for ritual.
Yeah, I'm all about ritual. I also identify as being a bruja, a witch. And I have been, I believe, again, it's been something that I've been born with and into, and I've been able to also really honor that. And I think, honestly, Nick, leaving teaching, it just kind of opened up space for me to explore these aspects of myself that I've had in personal practice, and that the universe was like, hey, you could share this stuff with people and it would be really beautiful. Because it wasn't like I left teaching and said, I don't want to do anything. I'm like, wait, I still want to be of service to my community, but how do I do that in a way that isn't not attached to systems that, could have, but were very harmful and oppressive? Like, how could I do it on my own? So yeah, breath, connecting, ritual. I love it.
Were there ways that you sort of, maybe looking back now, kind of connected with that part of yourself as like a younger person, as a child, that you recognize now?
Yes. One of my most favorite memories. Thank you for asking me about this, because I love, love, love being able to remember and to honor it. There were times where I was babysat by my grandmother on my father's side, and no, we didn't have no internet, y'all. We were like, bikes, walking, like, and there,
the 80s, the
70s. Let's take it back. Let's be real. 70s. So I used to go outside to play, and I was always very drawn to churches. And there was a church over by where my grandmother lived. And I guess it was actually kind of a far walk, but then it was like, okay, I'm going to play. I'll be back whenever. Nobody really, and not because they didn't care. It was just that's how it was. You'd go out and play. And so I ventured off. I always found myself with the candles. And candle magic is one of my most favorite rituals ever. I work with them every day, and I just felt very called to them. And I felt like I wanted to go and sit and be like, I understood why, like, without anyone ever explaining to me, like, why those candles were being lit, like, and the intention. So candle magic was my very first, like, thing that I was really drawn to. And yeah, so I would venture off to churches. And that was kind of like my intro to that. And I think maybe I did have ritual as an athlete. I think a lot of my practices might have shown up in the way in which I played sports, because it was something that was my outlet growing up. So maybe they wouldn't have been as witchy, so to speak, but they were very ritualistic. Like, certain things that I would wear before the game, certain things I would eat, or all of those things to me very much read as me attuning to my system, right? And having some type of ritual to prepare my body, mind, spirit to be in some type of activity. So
yeah,
I messed around with it as a teenager too. I'm sure there were times when we were like playing around with stuff. I don't think I really, honestly, until I dated my first partner that also was a witch, and that I really kind of became more comfortable kind of being like, oh yeah, like this is stuff that I vibe with.
Yeah.
Now it's all about, new moons, full moons, all of it. Give it all of it.
Yeah. I was just curious because I've talked to other people on the show, and they share a little bit about how they sort of see that aspect of themselves as a child. And I know for me, like, looking back, I can see the little witchy animist part of me really just connecting with nature. Like I really just loved being outside, and I would often be in my backyard by myself and play with my dogs and, be with the trees and the plants and the flowers. And one of my most favorite things was when, growing up in Southern California, we have the Santa Ana winds. And I would always want to go outside at the Santa Ana winds. And they usually would come at night. So it would be like dusk or dark or something like that. And I would just like go sit in my treehouse or go like huddle in the corner of the yard when the wind was blowing and just like dance in the wind or listen to the wind and really listen to the way that the trees and all the natural world was just sort of, blowing through the wind, and just it felt so energizing to me.
Yeah, I remember feeling sensitive to, different types of weather, like as a kid too, like foggy mornings, like when it was really foggy at school, I loved to go get lost in the fog because it felt so good. So I remember also resonating with like nature or rain, you know what I mean? The feeling of rain, like, I don't know, or wind and those things. So yeah, being connected to nature and exploring that. I was also thinking food. I also think that a lot of like being really curious about alchemizing and cooking and wanting to be around my elders. But I also think I had a deeper understanding of the medicine. Like there's a saying, la comida es medicina, food is medicine. And I think I also really resonated to that because I also very much identify as like a kitchen witch. So a lot of that kind of alchemizing, like food and prepping food and working with herbs and plants. Like I think there was always that curiosity. I had great grandparents that were curanderas, and they now I know what those little gardens of the little herbs, and my great grandfather used to somatically work on people, and he was using some of those herbs, you know, so like limpias, cleanses. It just, I didn't connect those dots back then as to why I was so curious and wanted to be around that energy. Certainly today it makes sense because it was, you know, just a calling that was there inside of me. Yeah.
I wonder if you would be open to sharing the story that you've shared with me a little bit about service and how service has sort of been something you followed through your path and that you kind of learned about.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thank you. So I was born and raised in Santa Ana, California, which is in Orange County and Santa Ana. And I was also raised to assimilate. And so I was very disconnected from my indigenous culture. And my mom was her language of love was education. So my sister and I were put in private school. And private school, it was really interesting because we had religion class. And I just remember there was one particular teacher that only lasted a year, which I now know why, because she was very into meditation and it was a Catholic school and she was very into agape. But she was the one that talked about service work and being of service to community, right? And being of service. And so in private school, I think it must have been around the time that I was having to choose what high school I was going to apply to, but really my mom had decided which high school. There were a lot of requirements around community service, but particularly when that particular teacher who had an agape room, which was our meditation room, she talked about how it's really important for us to just be of service. That was it, to just find something to be of service. So I was very curious. And I went home and I said, Mom, my teacher said that, you know, we should be of service, you know, like, and I want to do this. Like, you know, she talked about soup kitchen, soup kitchen. And I said, I'd like to go do this. And she said, okay, well, get me the information. You know, God bless my mom, because I was very curious. So she was very like, okay. But also because I think she kind of knew that I was coming into high school where that might have been something that was going to be something I needed to explore as a part of being there. And she did it, Nick. She let me go. And so she took me down to a soup kitchen that was, I can still see it to this day. And she dropped me off, you know, and I went in there and I stayed with that soup kitchen through high school, actually, way above and beyond whatever, because I fell in love with the community. I loved going and cooking and preparing food for people. And then we got to serve people and break bread. So being of service to me, to my community, has been something, regardless of whether it was a requirement or not, it just has always felt good to my system to in some way be of service to people. And I think that I've found ways to do that throughout my life and honored it. So when, again, leaving teaching, again, an elder, I said, you know, I really want to be of service to my community. So how could I do that? You know, and so I got to sit with, well, what communities? And BIPOC is really important to me because I now consider myself a recovered assimilated person. So I'm very much in touch with what it means to be a Native Indigenous person of color. And so it's a great way to be of service and offer service of breathwork and facilitation to them. Being a part of my queer community. So you and I are getting to cultivate that connection. And then I have an in-person coming up in October with a queer shop here in Long Beach. So yeah, just being of service, period, I think is just part of my own way of being here in this planet, on this. I think it's really important. And yeah, like, I don't know, it's a very passion point for me. And thank you for asking about that, because it really is something that I think about every single day. I mentor for the same reason that I continue to mentor young people, because I do believe it's really important to be of service. Yeah, it's just part of my magic, part of my practice.
I want to take a quick break to offer you a gift. I work with many queer folks who struggle with self-esteem, self-acceptance, and confidence. And I get it. Growing up queer is no cakewalk. Living in a world filled with homophobia and oppression can take its toll. Having the strength to be your true self can be a challenge. But you can change that. So if you'd like support taking the first few steps, head over to my website and grab the free mini course, The Self-Confident Queer. Just go to queerhealingjourneys.com/confident. This mini course will walk you through 3 simple steps to help you begin to build your self-worth and confidence today. So head over to queerhealingjourneys.com/confident and get the free course today. Okay, now back to the conversation. Yeah, I know when we were talking about it, I've also thought about the ways that it's sort of shown up in my life and my family and my history, and the way that it's affected me and the work that I bring to the world. And I also just think it's important in general for people to recognize the ways that they maybe are of service and they don't realize it, and what we can learn from being of service about ourselves and about other people, about cultivating compassion and understanding, and, you know, especially like feeding the homeless, like recognizing our privilege and looking at the imbalances of power. And I know, especially for me, it helps me see and really value, you know, the life that I have, and appreciate that, you know, my clients show up and they allow me to support them, and they are vulnerable with me, and really teach me about what it means to be vulnerable and to go into the shadow of life. Right?
Yeah, that's beautiful for sure. Yeah, thank you for asking about that.
So you started out by talking about breath and breath work, and I want to open that up a little bit more for people, because some people listening may not know exactly what breath work is, or there's lots of different kinds of breath work. So I wonder if you want to share a little bit about like what breath work with TanyaMarck looks like.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I love what you said about like there's so many different types, right? So to me, that's magic, right? This tool that we have in our body, there's so many different ways to access it, right? So I feel like that's one of the most potent medicines of breath, is that there's all kinds of ways to utilize it and explore it and see what happens in the body. So for me, the timing around finding and deciding to get certified in breathwork also was pairing with a very deep healing time. So as I was learning different techniques than just the natural inhale and exhale, I was like, holy shit, like, wow, I didn't, you know, it was almost like this exploration of like, ooh, wow, there's more here, you know? Mm-hmm. I am a breathwork facilitator that really, really, truly resonates with connecting to our breath and our system as it feels good to whatever that is for the person. So I'm always going to be about naturally connecting to the inhale and exhale in our bodies. And then I really do resonate with a 2-part technique, active breathing, a lot of names for it, where you're actually bottom line activating the sympathetic nervous system. So breath work with an intention of perhaps releasing some energy, a way of self-care, meaning that it's embedded like, hey, I've got some things I need to release. That type of breath work to me is really potent. It continues to be a very potent part of my own practice. And I do believe that it's a beautiful way for folks to release energy in their systems. Because yeah, our bodies hold on to stuff, you know, and so breath work to me is also a way of activating and releasing, and not just releasing, it also we can receive through breath too. So those are the 2 that I really resonate with the most, is what feels good in the system and being able to use that as a way, and also checking in with the system and asking the system, like, hey, does this feel good right now? Like just the natural inhale and exhale. And maybe as we're going through a session, you feel more coming up. So I will invite folks to say, hey, you can deepen that if you feel that you want to, your body is telling you. But again, it's really about facilitating, guiding people on how to connect to their own system and respond accordingly, right? But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff for relaxation, energy, energizing. I check in with my system and ask. So this morning, prepping outside in the sun, I was doing a few lion's breaths with the inhale and just an out, tongue out. to kind of just tell my system, like, hey, we're going into this great energy with Nick, like, let's get grounded. The moon happens to be in Leo, so lion's breath felt really good, like appreciating, applauding, this invitation, being my authentic self. Yeah, it's mostly, I think the equation I'm working with right now is how to guide people to connect and ask their own system what might feel good, and then providing those options for folks. And right now I'm really resonating with guiding folks with the different exhales. So a lot of stuff like that you and I learn in devotional voice, like the audible exhale, the SH, the S, and really and also very much attaching it to movement. So breath work and movement are really paired for me right now in practice, that I feel like it's a really helpful way of, again, getting in touch with releasing energy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, when I hear that, I think about like Qigong or martial arts, which is a lot about movement with the breath too. Yeah. So can you say a little bit more about like why someone might come see you or come to one of your groups for breath work, or some of the benefits that people have shared with you about breath work for them, for listeners who are like, well, I still don't quite get, like, why would I do it?
Well, I mean, to me, breath work is a tool, and it's a tool that's part of self-care, my self-care and support and care. So I feel like if folks are looking for a way to be connected to their breath, to their system as a means of self-care and support and care, breath work is a really something that can be, I think it's so accessible, right? Like even if we wanted to right now, if I was experiencing nervousness, I could say, Nick, can we pause and can we just ground? And so I feel like if you happen to be exploring and looking for forms of self-care, right? If you happen to be looking for, I don't know, just a way of exploring, I think breathwork has also been very spiritual for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, just connecting to the body, connecting to your system, maybe recognizing like, hey, shit, maybe I have held on to some stuff for a really long time, and maybe I do need to integrate a tool that might help facilitate the release of that. Also, community. I think that while doing breathwork one-on-one is incredibly potent and one of my favorite things to do, when we gather in community and breathe in community, I believe that we are sending a frequency out of such potent healing all the way back, for those that couldn't breathe or didn't have access to that tool. So we're sending it back ancestrally, and we're sending it out and forward and modeling it. So I also believe that it's a really potent frequency as a community to be a part of. Yeah. And that with the reminder, we don't have to do shit on our own. Like I can come into a circle and say, wow, I feel, like set intention with, like I'm coming here, I have some things to release. And what a beautiful thing to know that, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And other people are here doing their work. And together, we're going to breathe together, and we're going to, just kapow that energy of like, yeah, we're here, but we're also sending it to the collective. So,
yeah. Also share a little bit of a story, maybe a specific example for people. So I was working with a client the other day doing some somatic work on the table, and I'm not trained in breath work, but as part of doing somatic work, I'm trained to like notice the breath and what's happening with the breath, and have done some breath work, different kinds of breath work myself. So I feel like I have enough knowledge to say, let's just explore this a little bit, right? And so this person was struggling with anxiety, and they were really feeling a lot of like tension in their chest. And so we worked with that a little bit. And then they had talked about how they've really struggled with breathing more deeply. But the thing that we noticed, which was interesting to me, is that they tend to breathe primarily from the belly, and this person is not of white American descent. They're an immigrant. And, in my experience, most people of white European descent or Westerners tend to be more chest breathers and not so much belly breathers. So it was interesting to have someone who was having an opposite experience, right? And so I just had them gently notice, like, placing their hand on their chest, more in their lung area, like how were they breathing there? And if we could just maybe expand that a little bit. And then I had my hands under them on their back, and I could even feel there was a difference between the left and the right side of the lung too. And so we were just really exploring that and playing with that and just bringing more awareness to like how is breath moving through the body in different ways. And so, they were able to just, in 15, 20 minutes, just explore that in a very soothing, gentle, soft way and start to feel a little bit more freedom, a little bit more expansiveness, and a decrease in their anxiety and their emotional charge in that way.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that example. I mean, to me, it just reiterates the potency of breath, right? And when we do connect to our system, what we can discover. Because when I say systems, I guess I should break that down and say it's emotions, physical, spiritual, mental, it's all of those things and how the breath can have an impact on those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we're able to notice those kinds of things, like, ooh, last night as a facilitator, I could feel that there was someone that had tons of resistance in their chest. I could feel it. And my hands were coming out like bird wings as I was helping to breathe, right? Like, it's like, and later hearing, Sam share like, ooh, I felt that all move. Like I felt it too. Like, it's fascinating the power of what our breath can do. Like it can be very activating, right? We may not even know until we get there and start connecting to our breath. And then all of a sudden we're like, ooh, I feel tension, or, ooh, my body's resisting, or, oh my gosh, like I feel like all of those things. And to me, that really just reiterates like, yeah, it's the power of breath, and learning to navigate with it, I feel like is really beautiful. I love hearing that you're able to help that person connect to their breath, connect to their system, and just be more aware of like, ooh, this is what's happening, right? So that really is, to me, that breath work, connecting to the system, and connecting it to movement, awareness, and it helps with all the things.
Yeah.
I am convinced of that. I have now used Wim Hof in so many different ways. I just recently injured my arm reaching for something. And I was like, well, I don't know. Let's see. But it's really very telling, that again, taking the breath to a system in the body and being very different. This isn't an emotional thing. I wasn't feeling stressed. I was literally feeling a physical symptom in my body. And I experienced relief.
Yeah.
Just 10 minutes of Wim Hof, and recognizing and going, okay, I'm going to let my oxygen, my breath do the work in the system. To me, that's magic. That's so potent. I came from a place of like, ooh, I have a pain. What pill am I going to reach for? Oh, let me take an anti-inflammatory. Now it's all about plants. And I go to my breath first. That's the truth, Nick. I go to my breath first, no matter what it is that I'm experiencing, breath first.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's what I love sharing with people. And I get fired up because I'm like, oh, you have this really potent tool, like you just take the time to be with it and sit with it. Like it's very potent.
Yeah. I think breath is especially potent when it comes to working with pain.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because a lot of the time pain is just like constriction. And as we can imagine sending the breath there, it gets the muscle, the tissue, the nerves to relax and open up. And then there can be more blood flow and more energy flow. And, the electrical pulses can get through and the healing can then come in.
And it's a process. So it's very different than saying, I have it was very strong muscle spasm that I was experiencing in my arm, where old programming would say, ooh, maybe I should take a muscle relaxer, because that has a very Band-Aid quick fix, I'm feeling something. Breath, going to Wim Hof meant I gotta be uncomfortable, and here I am with my arm, and it's feeling spasm, and here I am on my right hand, clicking on the thing to get to the Wim Hof, but also it's about being connected to my system. It's not going outside of my system for anything. That's what I love about breath.
Yeah.
It brings us in. For me, it's an internal thing. It brings me connected to internally so that I can be aware of or have the awareness, or, take the time to be aware of what's going on. And then that helps me navigate internally and externally. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then that's empowering because you're like, I am doing this thing. I am helping myself get better. I'm not depending on this other system outside of me that I am, giving power away to help me feel better.
Or having to be knocked out for 12 hours on something that would totally affect my system. And listen, I'm not talking shit about those medications. I'm just saying that I've recognized that I have the tool of breath. And yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer. It took a few days for the arm to get reset, but it still did it, right? It still went through the healing process. So I think sometimes the breath, it can be very potent, and it's a process though. It doesn't necessarily always, it's not let me take this and, it's all gone. And I believe the consistency of breath work, the more consistently we tap into our systems and make it a tool, the even more potent it becomes. Because then, like myself, gosh, even 5 years ago, Nick, I probably would have reached for ibuprofen or naproxen because my arm was hurting. The last thing I would have been thinking about was, let me try Wim Hof in the middle of my arm spasming, So I think it's a connection. My body was telling me, right, I'm connected enough to my system that said, hey, do some Wim Hof. That'll help get that healing process going, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's very much to me like breath connects us to the system, all the systems, not just one.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you share with us a little bit about some of the offerings that you have? You have these regular monthly offerings that people can join online.
I do. And I'm super honored. And it actually checks all the boxes. They're community service offerings. So they're accessible and free to everyone. Third Tuesdays, we gather at 6 p.m. PST, and I work with a lovely co-facilitator, Ruth Camila, who's an amazing Reiki master. And on the fourth Sundays of each month, hosted by the Ancestor Project, I facilitate a breathwork for BIPOC group, which is also being, another way of being a service to my community. Another beautiful offering. This Sunday, I get to begin a new co-facilitation with a dear friend, Ellen Wong, who's a quantum journey guide. So Ellen's going to be guiding us through breath work, and then she's going to pass it off to me, and I'm going to take the journey, and we're going to bring movement and breath into it and finish off the journey. So that's going to be really cool. And another offering is coming up in October. By this time, right, November. So we should be seeing an offering on Thursdays. And I'm working with Samantha Williams, another Reiki master. So we're not sure yet if it's going to be the first or second Thursday of the month. We're still fine tuning that, but yeah.
Good.
And then hopefully you and I in 2023, that's the plan, Nick, right?
Yeah,
we're going to start those alternating meditations on Saturday with Queer Spirit Community. So I'm excited about that too. Yeah.
And so where can people find you and find out about your offerings?
Right now, Instagram, and my handle is @TanyaMarck, and TanyaMarck. And that's where I post current offerings. And I should be having a website up here in the next month or so coming along here too. So stay tuned for that.
Great. Well, I'll have the link in the show notes so people can find that there. So before I let you go, can you share with us a person, practice, or experience that has supported your queer spirit to flourish?
My queer spirit to flourish. I'm going to go to dance, and I'm going to talk about the importance of dance. And I'm not going to associate it to one person, but I am going to associate it to every queer drag queen, soul, spirit that has ever really just honored dance as a medicine of being able to honor ancestors in that way. So all forms of dance and music to me is a way of honoring that. And all the queer folks that have, come before us, and all of these beautiful folks that are, even more so honoring their queer spirit, right? More so than ever, I think, are very inspirational to me in continuing, honor my authentic queer non-binary self. So dance and music and celebration.
Yes. More of that, please.
Yes, please.
Well, TanyaMarck, it was so great having you here and introducing you to folks, since you're going to be involved more in the future. And I look forward to connecting in the future.
Me too. Thanks, Nick.
To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. Make sure you don't miss future episodes by following the show on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for listening. Until next time, be well.